May the world become peaceful. May all men and women be gentle and honest. May all think of mutual welfare. May the minds of all be turned to the highest good. May there be devotion in the hearts of all to the Supreme Lord. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. A framed quote on our sunroom wall says, "Bad times are occasions a good learner would not miss." Ralph Waldo Emerson. The idea, of course, is that we profit more from the trying experiences in life than we do from the pleasant ones. Vivekananda was very clear about this. Quote, "In studying the great characters the world has produced, I dare say, in the vast majority of cases, it would be found that it was misery that taught more than happiness. It was poverty that taught more than wealth. It was blows that brought out their inner fire more than praise," unquote. By negotiating the trials of life, we increase our capability to deal with difficulties and prepare ourselves for the trials and tribulations yet to be encountered. Quote, "A smooth sea never made a skilled sailor," unquote, Franklin Roosevelt. Bad times are occasions a good learner would not miss. In a spiritual sense, though, we may all be bad learners, even in good times. A limited amount of observation of our own behavior probably provides all the confirmation we need. How many of us don't always say the kind word, do the good deed, avoid the critical thought, in spite of the innumerable lessons we've heard from Jesus, Buddha, Holy Mother, and other spiritual teachers that that's what we're supposed to do? How many of us have heard from Ramakrishna, Gandhi, and our mothers about how important it is to tell the truth, although not harsh truths? Yet how many times do we use partial truths, bent truths, or out-and-out untruths because that suits our purpose at the time? If we were really good learners, we would only need to hear the lesson once to put it into practice. As they might say in the Ozarks, you don't learn nothing the second time you're kicked by a mule. We keep hearing the same eternal truths time after time, and they seemingly go in one ear and out the other. Bad learners, even in good times. Emerson's quote presupposes that we are able to change our behavior, to learn based on what we've been through. The dictionary says learning is, 1, the act or experience of one that learns. 2, knowledge or skill acquired by instruction or study. 3, modification of a behavioral tendency by experience. In this context, we're not interested in numbers 1 and 2. Think of how many things you've learned and promptly forgotten, or not used and forgotten, or like some of us, forgotten in spite of attempted use. But the third definition, modification of a behavioral tendency by experience, is exactly what Emerson had in mind. Quote, "Good judgment comes from experience. Bad judgment creates experience." Barry LePatner. As you can tell, I love good quotes. When we can go through unfortunate experiences and think and behave differently afterwards in a positive way, then we've made some progress in life, regardless of the temporal consequences. There are many different kinds of knowledge and many different ways to learn. Psychology and education have provided us with frameworks or learning theories for understanding what happens when learning takes place. But these theories almost universally focus on the acquisition of worldly, temporal knowledge, the product of what Ramakrishna spurned as breadwinning education. What we're interested in here is the special life-changing knowledge that is gained by spiritual learning, an area that learning theory hardly mentions. So what exactly is spiritual learning? Well, that could be the topic for a whole nother lecture, but at least for the next hour, let's say that spiritual learning is gaining that knowledge which changes us permanently in a Godward direction. Just going through bad times, though, is not enough to learn our lessons, just like living in peaceful surroundings is not enough to make one peaceful. I've known several people excuse me, whose lives seem to be an uninterrupted string of disasters, yet their attitude never seems to change, and they keep making the same poor life choices that got them there in the first place. You've probably known similar people. Of two persons having the same experience, one may blossom while the other is depleted. We have to have some willingness, indeed some ability, to learn from life's lessons before we are changed by them. Buddha knew this exactly when he said, quote, "We learn not from experience, but from our capacity for experience," unquote. Or as Aldous Huxley put it, quote, "Experience is not what happens to a person, it is what a person does with what happens to him," unquote. I read Swami Paramananda's book of daily thoughts and prayers every day, and some time ago was struck by the entry for February 15th. It is so much to the point that I want to share part of it with you, though we're a couple of days early. The entry reads, thought for the day: "Our trials are a better blessing than the pleasant things which happen to us." Lines: "Sister and brother, thy load is heavy and thou art weary, but one who has placed the load upon thy head will also give thee strength to carry it. He knows both thy strength and failing. His gift is just and right proportioned. Bear thou then with unruffled mind joy and sorrow, loss and gain." Lesson: O blessed sorrow, you rend our heart with your sharp thrust, that we may be purged of self and delusion. You are truly our beneficent friend, but you come with fierce scorn of a foe. Come as oft as you think best. That's a notably unusual view, to call a trial blessed sorrow and beneficent friend. It says, though, that the one who gave us the burden will also give us the strength to carry it. And part of that strength given is certainly help with our lessons, since particularly in bad times, we need help learning anything. So what better hope could there be than divine help, or a divine teacher such as Ramakrishna? So for our examples, I'm going to focus on two people who went through the most unfortunate of tragedies, but who also had the benefit of divine grace and guidance to help them negotiate and learn from these sorrows in transformative ways. Excuse me. Before we begin our case studies, it's worth reflecting a little on the judgments we make when we say something in life is good or bad. Hearing this lecture's title, we certainly relate to what we think are bad times and good karma from our own experience. But Taoists, among others, would have us reconsider what they would consider to be facile conclusions about what is good and bad. The Taoist symbol of interwoven black and white shows us that neither good or bad are entirely good or entirely bad, and that neither exists without the opposite, and the whole requires both. In Taoist terms, both yin and yang are necessary for the whole, which shows the overall unity and balance of life. This wholeness and balance is shown nicely in the story of the Taoist farmer whose horse ran away one day. When his neighbor came over to express great sympathy, the farmer only said, "Who knows what is good and bad?" The next day, the horse came back from the hills, leading a large number of wild horses into the farmer's corral. So now he not only had one, but a whole herd of horses. And the neighbor came over this time to express his congratulations, so exuberant about this good fortune that had come to the farmer. But the farmer simply said, "Who knows what is good and bad?" The next day, the farmer's son broke his leg trying to tame one of the new wild horses. And again the neighbor ran over to say how awful this was, how he would never be able to do all the work on the farm without his son's help. But the Taoist farmer answered, as always, "Who knows what is good and bad?" And then the following day, a regiment of soldiers came through that part of China, conscripting recruits by force, drafting eligible young men to be sent to the war, very likely to be killed. But the farmer's son couldn't be taken, of course, because of his broken leg. When the ecstatic neighbor came running over as he'd always done in the past, this time he wasn't surprised to hear the farmer answer yet once more, "Who knows what is good and bad?" The farmer had the gift of accepting what life gives without trying to judge it or force out of it something else. The apparent contradiction of the phrase blessed sorrow embodies that sense of the whole containing all opposites, where there is never light without dark, birth without death, or good without bad. We shouldn't always be so quick to judge what is good and what is bad. The two devotees of Ramakrishna whose lives we'll examine would agree wholeheartedly with the daily prayer, as their sorrow did indeed become blessed sorrow through the grace of Ramakrishna and their own self-effort. The devotees are Golap Ma and Girish Ghosh. There's probably no more agonizing human experience than the loss of loved ones, particularly those losses that seem to come before their time. While working with critically ill children as a nurse at Children's Hospital in the intensive care unit, I came to understand firsthand the meaning of the story of the king and the blessing. When the king's beloved son produced his first grandchild, the king went to a revered holy man to ask a blessing for his family. But the king was incensed when all the holy man could say was, "You will die, your son will die, and your grandson will die." As the angry king was about to order his guards to throw the holy man into prison, the holy man said quietly, "I have given you the greatest of blessings, O king. It is the natural order of things for each generation to pass in its turn, making way for those that follow in due course. For this order to be disturbed is among the greatest of tragedies. For the order to be maintained is the greatest of blessings." For a parent, suffering the loss of a child is one of these greatest of tragedies. Golap Sundari Devi, or Golap Ma, was one of Holy Mother's closest companions, and it was a tragedy of this kind that brought her to Ramakrishna. She was married at a young age to a poor Brahmin who died in a few short years, leaving her to care for a son and a daughter. Then the son died while still a small child, so the daughter, Chandi, the last of Golap's family, became the center of Golap's life. Chandi grew into a charming young woman and was successfully married to a wealthy Calcutta landlord. But Chandi died unexpectedly, throwing Golap into unending bouts of crying and relentless self-reproach. She felt like she was adrift alone in the world. A neighbor, Yogin Ma, moved by Golap's suffering, brought her to see Ramakrishna in 1885. Golap Ma later described this meeting. Quote, "When I first went to the master, I was tormented with grief from my daughter, Chandi. Yogin took me to him. He touched my head and removed all grief from my heart. It was amazing. In a moment, my mind became calm and serene. I immediately laughed like a jnani, a knower of supreme knowledge. I felt that I'd come to the world to act in a play. Who is whose mother and who is whose daughter? In my childhood, I had played with cloth dolls, and after that I played with flesh and blood dolls. This world is nothing but a play of dolls, so why should I cry for my daughter? It is a glorious thing to cry for God. Such was the power of the master," unquote. The saying goes, when you get to your wit's end, you'll find God lives there. After Golap poured her heart out to Ramakrishna by telling her of many losses, he told her, quote, "You are fortunate. God helps those who have no one to call their own," unquote. He then sang a song. "Dwell, O mind, within yourself. Enter no other's home. If you but seek there, you will find all you are searching for. God, the philosopher's stone, who answers every prayer, lies hidden deep within your heart, the richest gem of all." Golap was greatly attracted to the mother by this first visit and began coming regularly. M describes one of these visits to the master in his entry in the Gospel for June 13th, 1885. The entry begins, quote, "About 3:00 in the afternoon, Sri Ramakrishna was resting in his room after the midday meal. A pundit was sitting on a mat on the floor. Near the north door of the room stood a Brahmin woman, this was Golap Ma, who had recently lost her daughter and was stricken with grief. Ramakrishna spent some time conversing with M, the pundit, and other visitors. Then he began talking of a boyhood friend. Quote, "As a boy at Kamarpukur, I loved Ram Malik dearly, but afterwards, when he came here, I couldn't even touch him. Now he has a shop at Chanak. I sent for him many a time. He came here the other day and spent 2 days. Ram said he had no children. He brought up his nephew, but the boy died. He told me this with a sigh. His eyes were filled with tears. He was grief-stricken for his nephew. He said further that since they had no children of their own, all of his wife's affection had been turned to the nephew. She was completely overwhelmed with grief. Ram said to her, 'You're crazy. What will you gain by grieving? Do you want to go to Benares?' You see, he called his wife crazy. Grief for the boy totally deluded him. I found he had no stuff in him. I couldn't touch him." The Brahmin lady still stood near the north door. She was a widow. Her only daughter had been married to a very aristocratic man, a landlord in Calcutta with the title of Raja. Whenever the daughter visited her, she was escorted by liveried footmen. Then the mother's heart swelled with pride. Just a few days ago, the daughter had died, and now she was beside herself with sorrow. The Brahmin lady listened to the account of Ram Malik's grief for his nephew. For the last few days, she had been running to the master from her home at Bagbazar like an insane person. She was eager to know whether Ramakrishna could suggest any remedy for her unquenchable grief. Sri Ramakrishna resumed the conversation. To M. "The truth is that God alone is real and all else unreal. People, universe, house, children, all these are like the magic of the magician. But the magician alone is real and his magic unreal. The unreal exists for a second and then vanishes. Birth and death are like magic. You see the magic for a second and then it disappears. God alone is real and all else unreal. Water alone is real. its bubbles appear and disappear. They disappear into the very water from which they arise. God is like an ocean, and living beings are its bubbles. They are born there, and they die there. Children are like the few small bubbles around a big one. God alone is real. Make an effort to cultivate love for him and find out the means to realize him. What will you gain by grieving? All sat in silence. The Brahmin lady said, "May I go home now?" The master said to her tenderly, "Do you want to go now? It is very hot. Why now? You can go later in a carriage with the devotees." Unquote. Some visits later, Ramakrishna introduced Golap Ma to the Holy Mother and said, "You should feed this Brahmin girl well. Sorrow is assuaged when the stomach is full." In the incidents we've just heard, the master began helping Golap Ma by touching her. The master's touch had an amazing power to change others. Swami Sardananda wrote, quote, "It is difficult to describe the wonderfully enchanting power of the master's touch and his words. We have seen and heard many instances of how the master, with a mere touch, would draw within himself the powers that kept others from realizing the truth, thereby reducing their intensity or permanently destroying them. We have also seen it happens that someone would say something but not create any impression on others, whereas the master would say the same thing and it would penetrate the listeners' hearts in such a way that from that point on, the current of their lives was changed." Unquote. Sardananda also mentioned that Ramakrishna only touched visitors that pleased him. The person had to be receptive, to be open and ready for the effects of the touch, which the power within Ramakrishna was quick to recognize. Golap Ma was very receptive because in her endless crying, she was imploring God relief from her suffering. Ramakrishna's touch was a way of separating the person from their ego, of stilling their mind so that his words would get a receptive hearing and a permanent home, unimpeded by what the person already thought they knew. Spiritual literature has numerous references to marvelous effects produced by the touch of saints and sages. Through the force of their spiritual power, they are able to instantly push us in a spiritual direction through simple physical contact. The problem is in staying pushed. A young child on a bicycle may move very fast when given a shove by one of his parents, but once the shove loses momentum, the child can only go as fast as his own legs can pedal. Ramakrishna instinctively knew that touch had to be coupled with wise words to penetrate the defenses of the ego and become rooted in consciousness. In his typical use then, Ramakrishna's touch was a preparatory tool for his words, in the same way soil must be tilled and prepared for the planting of seeds. Touch paved the way by subduing the ego and separating the person from his I consciousness so they could more clearly understand what the master was going to say. His discussion of his childhood friend Ram Malik, the nephew, grief, the magician, and the nature of reality, was all done expressly for Golap Ma by the all-compassionate master. Golap was so reassured by the master's kindness and affection that she somehow built up the courage to ask him to visit her dilapidated house in North Calcutta. M. describes this visit on July 8, 1885. Quote, "The master arrived at the house of the Brahmin lady who was grief-stricken on account of her daughter's death. It was an old brick house. Entering the house, the master passed the cowshed on his left. He and the devotees went to the roof, where they took seats. People were standing in rows. Others were seated. They were all eager to get a glimpse of Sri Ramakrishna. The Brahmini, which is Golap, had a sister. Both of them were widows. Their brothers also lived in the house with their families. The Brahmani had been busy all day making arrangements to receive Sri Ramakrishna. While the master was at Nanda Basu's house, she had been extremely restless, going out of the house every few minutes to see if he was coming. He had promised to come to her house from Nanda's. Because of his delay, she had thought perhaps he would not come at all. Sri Ramakrishna was seated on a carpet. The Brahmani's sister came to the master and saluted him. She said, "Sister has just gone to Nandu Basu's house to inquire the reason for your delay in coming here. She will return presently." The Brahmani's sister exclaimed, "Here comes sister." The Brahmani came and saluted the master. She was beside herself with joy. She did not know what to say. In a half-choked voice, she said, "This joy is too much for me. Perhaps I shall die of it. Tell me, friends, how shall I be able to live? I did not feel such a thrill even when Chandi, my daughter, used to visit the house accompanied by liveried footmen with armed guards lining both sides of the street. Oh, now I have no trace of my grief at her death. I was afraid he," meaning Ramakrishna, "would not come. Then I thought if that happened, I should throw into the Ganges all the things I had arranged for his reception and entertainment. I should not speak to him anymore. If he visited a place, I should go there, look at him from a distance, and then come away." M was amazed to see the Brahmani's sincere joy and her ecstatic mood. He was about to take the dust of her feet. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed and saluted M. She said, "I'm so happy to see you all here." She was talking like this when her sister came up and said, "Come down, sister. How can I manage things if you stay here? Can I do it all by myself?" But the Brahmani was overwhelmed with joy. She could not take her eyes from the master and the devotees. After a while, she respectfully took Ramakrishna to another room and offered him sweets and refreshments. Later that evening, M was alone with Ramakrishna and recorded their conversation. "M, how amazing! A similar thing happened with two women at the time of Jesus. They were two sisters and devoted to Christ, Martha and Mary." Master eagerly, "Tell me the story." M, "Jesus Christ, like you, went to their house with his devotees. At the sight of him, one of the sisters was filled with ecstatic happiness. The other sister, all by herself, was arranging the food to entertain Jesus. She complained to the master, saying, 'Lord, please judge for yourself how wrong my sister is. She is sitting in your room, and I am doing all these things by myself.' Jesus said, 'Your sister indeed is blessed. She has developed the only thing needful in human life, love of God.'" Master, "Well, after seeing all this, what do you feel?" M, "I feel that Christ, Chaitanya Deva, and yourself, all three are one and the same." Master, yes, one. It is indeed one." Unquote. This visit to Golap's house occurred only 6 weeks after the visit we read earlier, where Ramakrishna talked about Ram Malik's nephew and the magician for Golap's benefit. Not only is Golap overwhelmed with joy at the master's visit, but she acknowledges that she has literally no trace of grief over her daughter's death, which had caused her terrible suffering such a short time ago. Golap Ma continued her visits to the master in Dakshineswar and soon became Holy Mother's constant companion, serving her faithfully for 36 years. She took Ramakrishna's instructions seriously to cultivate love for God and find out the means to realize him. Her daily routine was to rise before 4 a.m., wash, then sit for 3 hours in japa and meditation. Holy Mother once said, "Golap has attained perfection through japa." From Swami's They Lived with God book, it is truly amazing how Sri Ramakrishna's touch transformed a poor, grief-stricken widow into a dedicated saint. We've heard how the intense, dedicated spiritual practices of Golap Ma, coupled with the divine grace of Ramakrishna, made her a realized soul. Before we go on to Girish Ghosh, this is a good time to discuss the place of karma in these circumstances. I realized that I needed a karma refresher too, as we are wont to use the word karma as if it were a synonym for luck. Good karma, good luck, bad luck, like something that just happens to us and that we have little or no direct control over. Of course, that is very far from the truth. If we truly understand karma, we know that every instant of our lives is karma. Every part of every life is the cumulative result of our karma. Vivekananda says in Karma Yoga, we are doing karma all the time. I'm talking to you, that is karma. You are listening, that is karma. We breathe, that is karma. We walk, karma. Everything we do, physical or mental, is karma, and it leaves our marks on us, unquote. This means that everything we are, everything that happens to us, is a result of karma that we ourselves set in motion. We create our own good karma, we create our own bad karma. We get absolutely nothing unless we earn it. Nothing in the universe occurs without a cause. Vivekananda again, quote, each one of us reaps what we ourselves have sown. These miseries under which we suffer, these bondages under which we struggle, have been caused by ourselves, and none in the universe is to blame. God is the least to blame for it, unquote. In Golap Ma's case, this meant that the premature losses of her husband, her son, and later her beloved daughter were all Golap's karma to bear. But it was also her karma that the concern of her neighbor brought her to Ramakrishna and divine help. If we study karma well, we must accept the difficult truth that all situations in life are of our own making, that we got into them and deserve both the credit and the blame. It might also follow, since we got ourselves into these situations, that we should also be able to get ourselves out of them as well. But that is often not the case. Many bad habits, such as addictions, for example, can be so entrapping that no amount of self-effort seems to have an effect on releasing us from their snares. We all need the grace of others' help. Girish Ghosh had no shortage of bad habits. He lost his mother at age 11 and his father 3 years later, and drifted into drinking and debauchery as a teenager. He became the leader of a neighborhood gang and would even desecrate the images of gods and goddesses. He saw no need for God and was an avowed atheist, a popular sentiment at the time, which considered belief in God foolish and a weakness. But at the same time, and evidence of Girish's paradoxical nature, he helped raise money for food and medicine for the poor and for the cremation of people in his community, and even learned something about homeopathic medicine to treat people. And though he dropped out of numerous schools, he had an extremely keen intellect and was a voracious reader in a wide variety of subjects, including history, philosophy, literature, science, and medicine. Girish was married a year after his father died, and his father-in-law got him a job as a bookkeeper in his office in an attempt to bring some discipline into Girish's life. During this time, he became involved in the theater, and with characteristic and indomitable energy, Girish might work all day at the office, then act at a play in the evening to return home at 3 or 4 in the morning. When Girish was just 30, his wife became gravely ill after giving birth to a stillborn daughter. In spite of the best doctors, as well as intensive care from Girish himself, his wife died, leaving Girish to care for a young son and daughter. Soon thereafter, he lost his job when his employer went out of business. In his grief and despair, he turned to alcohol and to writing poetry. Fortunately, after a short time, he found a new job. From Swami's book on Girish, quote, sometime after taking this job, he went on a business trip to Bhagalpur in central India. One day while he was there, he went for a walk with some friends and in a boisterous mood jumped into a deep ravine. When he tried to climb out, he found he was unable to do so. His friends then attempted to rescue him, but they failed. One of them commented, "Now we are in real trouble. You are an atheist, and yet no one can save you now but God. Let us all pray together." Girish found himself joining wholeheartedly in the prayer, and strangely, just then, he found a way out of the ravine. After he was safe, he said to his friends, "Today I have called on God out of fear. If I ever call on him again, it will be out of love. Otherwise, I will not call on him, even at the cost of my life." Girish later wrote in his memoirs, quote, "At such a crisis, I thought, does God exist? Does he listen to the prayers of people? Does he show them the way from darkness to light?" My mind said, yes. Immediately I closed my eyes and prayed, "O God, if thou art, carry me across. Give me refuge. I have none." I remembered the words of the Gita, quote, "Those who call on me only in the days of affliction, to them too I bring succor and refuge," unquote. These words sank deep in my consciousness and gave me solace in sorrow. I found the words of the Gita to be true. As the sun removes the darkness of the night, so the sun of hope arose and dispelled the gloom that had gathered thick in my mind. In the sea of trouble, I found the harbor of repose. Desire for inquiry came. Looking into the current of events, sometimes faith, sometimes doubt emerged. Everybody with whom I discussed my problems said unanimously that without instruction from a guru, doubt would not go and nothing could be achieved in spiritual life. But my intellect refused to accept a human being as a guru, for one has to salute the guru with the words, "The guru is Brahma, the guru is Vishnu, the guru is the Lord Maheshwara, the God of gods." How could I say this to a man like me? This was hypocrisy, but the tyranny of doubt was intolerable. Terrible conflicts pierced my heart through and through. That condition can better be imagined than described. Suppose a person all of a sudden is forcibly dragged to a dark, solitary room with his eyes covered and kept confined there with no food and drink. What will be the state of his mind? If you can picture his mental condition, you will be able to understand something of my own. There were moments when I was breathless with emotion. Thoughts of despair bit through me like a saw. At other times, the memory of the past was revived, and the darkness of my heart knew no bounds," unquote. Having read about Ramakrishna in the Indian Mirror and hearing that the Brahmo Samaj, a socio-religious organization, had been influenced by him, Girish became curious to know more about this alleged Paramahamsa. In his first meeting, though, Girish thought Ramakrishna's words were pretentious, and he got up and left. Several years later, his second meeting at the home of Balaram Basu left a better impression, but this time, a friend had enough of Ramakrishna's talk and pulled Girish away with him. Girish soon left the dull business world for the theater full-time, and at the age of 36 was hired as the manager of the National Theater, a job he held for 2 years. During that period, he wrote 9 dramas and 6 musicals because he needed a new play every 2 months to keep people coming back. In 1884, Girish's play Chaitanya Leela was the hit of the season in Calcutta. And when Ramakrishna came one evening, Girish met him and escorted his party to box seats. During the performance, Ramakrishna was deeply inspired by the drama and went into samadhi several times. When asked how he liked the play, he said, "I found the representation the same as the real." Now, this statement may not seem like much taken at face value, but if we consider the speaker and his frame of reference, we can understand that it was the highest possible praise. Girish continues in his memoirs, quote, 3 days later, I was sitting on the porch of a friend's house, which was at an intersection, and I saw Ramakrishna slowly approaching, accompanied by Narayan and a couple of other devotees. No sooner had I turned my eyes towards him than he saluted me. I returned his salute. Then he went on. For no unaccountable reason, my heart felt drawn towards him by an invisible string. As soon as he had gone a short distance, I felt an urge to follow him. I could not keep calm, for the attraction I felt was not of this earth. It was something for which no former experience had ever prepared me. It was something unique, which no words could describe. Just at that moment, a person whose name I do not recall brought me a message from him and said, "Sri Ramakrishna is calling you." I went, unquote. Perhaps 7 years elapsed between Girish's first meeting with Ramakrishna and this incident, unlike only days which elapsed between the death of Golap's daughter and her visit to Dakshineswar. In one of several magnet analogies in Vedanta, there is a description of the things of the world as an ordinary magnet and God as a huge one. Regardless how close a needle is to the ordinary magnet, eventually the attraction of the huge one will win out and draw the needle to it. Eventually, we must all come to God. Perhaps Girish's needle was covered by more dirt and dross, but certainly his sorrows had been deep as Golap's. But the time had to be right for both the teacher and the teaching. By the time of his fourth meeting with Ramakrishna, Girish was being inexorably drawn by the huge magnet. Girish followed Ramakrishna to Balaram's house. Quote, I asked him, "What is a guru?" He answered, "Do you know what the guru is? He is like a matchmaker. A matchmaker arranges for the union of the bride with the bridegroom. Likewise, a guru prepares for the meeting of the individual soul with the beloved, the divine spirit." Actually, he did not use the word matchmaker, but a slang expression, more forceful. Then he said to me, "You need not worry. Your guru has already been chosen." My heart was filled with unspeakable joy, for it seemed as though my search for a guru had ended. For did not Sri Ramakrishna say that my guru had already been chosen? Looking back at my former objections to a guru, I understood the pride and vanity which had lain behind my rationalizations. I had thought, after all, the guru is a man. The disciple is also a man. Why should one man stand before another with folded palms and follow him like a slave? But time after time, in the presence of Sri Ramakrishna, my pride crumbled into dust. Meeting me at the theater, it had been he who first saluted me. How could my pride remain in the presence of such a humble man? The memory of his humility created an indelible impression on my mind. A few days after my visit with him at Balaram's, I was sitting in the dressing room of the theater when a devotee came to me in a hurry and said with some concern, "Sri Ramakrishna is here in his carriage." I replied, "Very well, take him to the box and offer him a seat." But the devotee answered, "Won't you come to greet him personally and take him there yourself?" With some annoyance, I said, "Does he really need me? Can't he get there by himself?" Nevertheless, I went. I found him alighting from the carriage. Seeing his serene and radiant face, my stony heart melted. I rebuked myself in shame, and that shame still haunts my memory. To think that I had refused to greet this sweet and gentle soul. Then I conducted him upstairs. There I saluted him, touching his feet. Even now I do not understand the reason, but at that moment a radical change came over me, and I was a different man. I offered him a rose, which he accepted, but he returned it again, saying, "Only a god or a dandy is entitled to flowers. What shall I do with it?" There was a special room on the second floor of the Star Theater, which was intended for the visitors of the dress circle to sit in during the concert. Sri Ramakrishna came there, and a good number of devotees joined him. He started conversing with me. He spoke of several things while I listened longingly. I felt a spiritual current passing, as it were, through my body from foot to head and head to foot. All of a sudden, Sri Ramakrishna lost outer consciousness and went into ecstasy. And in that mood, he started talking with a young devotee. Many years earlier, I'd heard some slandering remarks against him, made by a very wicked man. Suddenly, I remembered those words, and at that moment, Sri Ramakrishna's ecstasy broke and his mood changed. Pointing towards me, he said, "There is some crookedness in your heart." I thought, yes, indeed, plenty of it, of various kinds. But I was at a loss to understand which kind he was particularly referring to. I asked, "How shall I get rid of it?" Sri Ramakrishna replied, "Have faith." Unquote. This fifth visit was an important turning point in Girish's life. We can see how contrite he was at not initially going to meet Ramakrishna, a foreshadowing of the exceptional reverence Girish developed for the Master. He began to feel that Ramakrishna was like family, whose love and concern for Girish were unconditional, regardless of his many shortcomings. And the transformation Girish felt occurred when he saluted Ramakrishna and touched his feet. Once again, the Master's touch had a profound effect internally. Notice Girish's language following this touch, where he, quote, listened lovingly, unquote, to the Master's words. From a proud and haughty skeptic, Girish was on his way to becoming a great and humble devotee. Girish's bad habits continued, but they began to transform in unusual ways. Again in Girish's words, quote, "One night in a happy and drunken mood, I was visiting a house of prostitution with two of my friends, but suddenly I felt an urge to visit Ramakrishna. My friends and I hired a carriage and drove out to Dakshineswar. It was late at night and everyone was asleep. The three of us entered Sri Ramakrishna's room, tipsy and reeling. Sri Ramakrishna grasped both my hands and began to sing and dance in ecstasy. The thought flashed through my mind, here is a man whose love embraces all, even a wicked man like me, whose own family would condemn me in this state. Surely this holy man, respected by the righteous, is also the savior of the fallen." After these meetings with Ramakrishna, I began to wonder, who is this man who speaks to me with such intimacy and makes me feel that he is my very own? No longer do I fear my own sins, for I feel sure he would not condemn me. Though he seems to know me through and through, a confession might do me great good. I must take shelter at his feet, for he alone can give me peace. Unquote. So here are Girish and friends, happily inebriated, going straight from prostitutes to Ramakrishna, who grabs Girish's hands and begins to dance ecstatically. He keeps the party going, but he transforms it into his own party, where the dancing is inspired by God and not by Bacchus. This says volumes about Ramakrishna and his manner of teaching. First, This is prime evidence of the charge made against Ramakrishna at the time that he did not show sufficient moral abhorrence towards prostitutes and drunkards. As we know, the theater of the time there was not considered an appropriate environment for women of good character, so the roles of women in plays were taken either by men dressed as women or by prostitutes or courtesans. 3 of Girish's star actresses, Tara, Binodini, and Tinkari, came from this background and were themselves transformed by the influence of Girish and Ramakrishna. And none of this bothered Ramakrishna in the least. Like all great souls, Ramakrishna was an equal opportunity teacher who accepted the virtuous and the sinner alike. As the bumper sticker says, God bless the world, no exceptions. You only had to want to hear what Ramakrishna had to say. Second, Ramakrishna placed little emphasis on the bad habits themselves. We know that he railed against the emphasis on sin in the Brahma Samaj and the Bible. This conversation between Girish and Ramakrishna occurred at the Star Theater. Girish, please bless me, sir. Master, have faith in the Divine Mother and you will attain everything. Girish, but I'm a sinner. Master, the wretch who constantly harps on sin becomes a sinner. Girish, sir, the very ground where I used to sit would become unholy. Master, how can you say that? Suppose as a light is brought into a room that has been dark 1,000 years, does it illumine the room little by little or all in a flash? Girish, then you have blessed me. Master, if you sincerely believe it, what more shall I say? I eat and drink and chant the name of God. Unquote. Notice how Ramakrishna downplays his ability to do anything for anyone, saying that only that he eats, drinks, and chants the name of God. There's no question that in conventional religious terms, Girish was a sinner and had engaged in nearly all of the common ones short of murder. He made no attempt to hide any of this and said, quote, I have drunk so much wine in my life that if the wine bottles were placed one upon another, they would stand as high as Mount Everest, unquote. He had also used opium for 15 years, and we know he visited brothels. But none of this bothered Ramakrishna in the least. Ramdada wrote in his biography of Ramakrishna, quote, once a devotee asked the master to tell Girish to give up drinking. The master replied, why do you have such a headache over him? He who is his guide will decide whether he should give up drinking or not. Moreover, he is a heroic devotee. Drinking will not do him any harm, unquote. Although he typically ignored it, at times Ramakrishna even seemed to support Girish's drinking. Swami Adbhutananda recalled, quote, once Girish Babu came to Dakshineswar quite drunk. The master told me, go and see if he left anything in his carriage. If you find something, bring it here. I did as I was told and found a bottle of wine and a glass. I brought both to the master. When the devotees saw the wine bottle, they began to laugh. But the master said to me, keep the bottle for him. He will want it for a final drink. Just see how liberal the master was towards his devotees, unquote. Ramakrishna knew those who came to him inside and out. He knew that Girish was as obstinate a person as one could be, and it was pointless to tell him to do anything, as he would do the opposite. He also knew that in its time, the drinking would fall away by itself. Swamiji quoted the master as saying, why should you give up anything? It will give you up. Gradually, Girish did give up drinking and did not drink at all the last 20 years of his life. When someone asked him, quote, the master did not ask you to stop drinking. Why don't you drink? Girish said, well, his permission has turned into prohibition. In my case, whenever a sinful thought arises, I see the Master appear in my mind," unquote. Ramakrishna's method was to emphasize only love of God, knowing that love of lesser things would gradually be edged out. And third, Ramakrishna knew how to dance with drunks, which in fact he did on other occasions, even stopping his carriage on the street to dance with complete strangers who were drunk. Christopher Isherwood observed in a talk on Girish, quote, "What Ramakrishna profoundly understood was that all of our so-called vices are in fact frustrated attempts to find the truth or to find peace or to find release from something. Of course, nowadays we are much more sophisticated about things like this, and people do understand this to a greater extent. But you see, that was why Ramakrishna, looking at a drunkard dancing, could think, why, that's the same as ecstasy, only he's going about it in the wrong way. The drive behind it, the desire, is for a state of joy in the eternal. And therefore Ramakrishna felt a tremendous kinship with people who were in this condition," unquote. Not only did he feel a kinship and share in their drunken dancing, Ramakrishna demonstrated how to get the same joy from love of God instead of love of liquor. Girish once told Ramakrishna that, quote, "everything about you is illegal," unquote, meaning that Ramakrishna broke all the laws of orthodox religion. So for Girish, Ramakrishna was the perfect teacher who could wholeheartedly redirect drunkenness Godward. Ramakrishna's method was to re-reference everything he touched in God's direction, including Girish. Girish Ghosh was one of the greatest playwrights and poets of Bengal and is considered the father of the Bengali theater. He is also considered one of the greatest of Ramakrishna's devotees. After Ramakrishna's death, Girish's losses continued, including 2 daughters, his second wife, and a young son. Only 1 son and a daughter survived. But his surrender to Ramakrishna was complete. When Gopal Ghosh, who was later to become Swami Advaitananda, had provided Ramakrishna with 12 pieces of ochre cloth and 12 rosaries, the adornment of monks, 11 were given to young disciples, and 1 reserved for Girish. For in spite of the life he'd lived, his faith and spirit of renunciation were second to none. As Girish himself said, "Look at me. I am Ramakrishna's miracle." We've heard many fine lessons from the lives of these 2 amazing devotees who had the great good fortune to be taught by Ramakrishna himself. In the interest of good learning, let's list some of these lessons for our benefit. Cry for God instead. God alone is real. Be touchable. If you're sad, eat. If you need help, ask. If you want to learn, listen. Have faith. Let bad habits give you up. Things only happen at the right time. And a little dancing is good for the soul. Golap Ma and Girish Ghosh were very different personalities with similar stories of transformation through bad times. Golap was an organized, disciplined person who loved order and cleanliness. Girish was an inspired bohemian who rarely ate or slept at the same time from one day to the next. Yet both were drawn to Ramakrishna through intense grief and despair. Golap in a matter of days, Girish over a period of years. Both suffered tremendous personal losses. Golap lost her husband and both children. Girish lost 2 wives and 5 children. Both found in Ramakrishna's touch and teaching the love and inspiration which transformed their lives into shining examples for all of us. Golap Ma of devotion, purity, and non-attachment. Girish of exceptional faith and renunciation. We have heard that bad times can be blessings in disguise, and that good karma doesn't mean good times, but rather grace that can move us closer to God. May we all become good learners like Golap and Girish. May we all know that bad times are occasions good learners would not miss. And may we all realize that the good karma of God's help with our struggles is always available if we just ask. That is my prayer for all of us today. May we follow thy path, O Lord, with unwavering faith and one-pointed devotion. Give us such spiritual insight that we may realize our union with thy divine being, and may this so strengthen us that we shall be unmoved by the hard experiences of life. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.